Ethan's eyes fluttered open to the sight of peeling paint and a single grime-covered window. He was alone, sprawled on a rusty gurney in what looked like a hospital room from a forgotten era. A dull ache throbbed in his temples, his memory a blurry fog. The silence was heavy, broken only by the faint rhythmic drip of water somewhere nearby. He pushed open the heavy door and stepped into a corridor that stretched into an oppressive darkness. The air was thick with the smell of decay and antiseptic. As he ventured forward, lights flickered erratically overhead, casting long, dancing shadows that played tricks on his eyes. Distant whispers seemed to slither from the walls, unintelligible but filled with a palpable sense of anguish. In a deserted nurse's station, he found a scattering of patient records, the ink faded and smeared. The names were unfamiliar, but the diagnoses were unsettling. Acute paranoia, sensory delusions. On a wall, scrawled in what looked like dried blood, were the words, "They watch from the walls." A cold dread began to coil in his stomach. This place was not just abandoned, it was haunted by a story he was becoming a part of. Drawn by a sound like a stifled sob, Ethan turned a corner and froze. A translucent figure, shimmering and indistinct, stood at the far end of the hall. It was gaunt, its form contorted in silent agony, and as it turned, its hollow eyes met his. It didn't flee, instead it drifted away, its movements beckoning him forward. Compelled by a force he couldn't understand, he followed it down a flight of stairs into a hidden basement. The air grew colder, the scent of chemicals now overpowering the decay. In the center of the subterranean laboratory, a single filing cabinet stood ajar. He pulled out a dusty file and his blood ran cold. The name on the tab was his own, Ethan Hayes. The ghost wasn't a spirit, it was a memory, a distorted reflection of his own past self, trapped in this place. The files were a catalog of horrors. They detailed experimental procedures, electroconvulsive therapies, and psychoactive drug trials, all performed on him. The gruesome descriptions ignited flashes of memory, the searing pain, the disembodied voices, the feeling of losing his own mind. As these repressed traumas flooded back, the world around him began to warp. The hospital walls seemed to breathe, the corridors twisting into impossible shapes, and the whispers grew into a cacophony of his own past screams. He wasn't escaping a physical place. He was trapped in a prison of his own making, a labyrinth constructed from fragmented memories and deep-seated trauma. This desperate flight for freedom was just another layer of the illusion. His escape was not a matter of finding a door, but of confronting the demons that held the keys. Ethan stood in the epicenter of his fractured psyche, the ghostly figures of doctors and his former self swirling around him. He had to fight, not against the hospital, but against the specter of his own past. The struggle was no longer for survival, but for sanity itself, a battle to reclaim his identity from the ruins of his mind. The path forward was uncertain, but for the first time a faint glimmer of hope pierced the darkness, the hope of a true awakening, a final, definitive escape from the nightmare within. Acceptance. It wasn't an escape, it was a realization. The endless, shifting corridors of this place, the walls that bled shadows and whispered forgotten names, this wasn't a hospital. It was a prison built of thought, and I was just one of its inmates. For the first time, I stopped running from the phantoms that haunted its halls. My frantic flight for an exit had ended, replaced by a desperate search for meaning in the madness. Every repeating hallway, every door that led back to where I started, was no longer a torment but a potential clue. I was no longer a victim. I was a detective in the architecture of my own broken mind. My search led me to a small, leather-bound book lying on a gurney in a ward I'd sworn was empty moments before. It wasn't mine. The cover was worn, the pages filled with a frantic, looping script. It was a diary, penned by someone else trapped in this same nightmare. As my fingers traced the desperate words, the sterile white walls around me began to flicker, not with my own fragmented past, but with images of another's. I saw a child's birthday party under a summer sun, a tearful goodbye at a train station, a first love smile, memories that were intimate, beautiful, and utterly alien to me. The diary was a revelation, a Rosetta Stone for this shared insanity. It spoke of a clandestine experiment, a misguided attempt to unify minds, to create a collective consciousness for therapeutic purposes. But the project had failed catastrophically. Instead of healing, it had created a cage, trapping the participants in a psychic feedback loop. I was not alone. The apparitions that once stalked me as vague, terrifying specters now sharpened, their faces becoming tragically distinct. They were the other patients, their souls echoing through this collective dream, their own memories bleeding into the fabric of my prison. I was living their lives, feeling their sorrows, all while trapped within my own. The diarist, a woman named Alara, had left a trail. Her final entries were less a narrative and more a series of cryptic directions, pointing toward the core, the anchor, the place where the experiment had originated. Following her breadcrumbs, I navigated through the most disorienting and hostile sections of the hospital, the architecture twisting in protest. The path ended at a heavy iron-banded door I had never seen before. It opened into the hospital's oldest, most neglected wing, a long condemned chapel, its pews coated in a thick shroud of dust and decay. At the far end, bathed in the faint ethereal glow of a shattered stained glass window, a spectral figure coalesced. It was him, Patient Zero. He was the nexus, the first mind to be snared, and now the anchor for all the others. His voice was not a sound, but a thought, planted directly into my consciousness. He explained that we were all just fragments of a dream he could no longer control. The world we inhabited was his nightmare, and we were unwilling actors. Then he offered me a choice, a burden heavier than any I had ever known. We could attempt to sever the connection, a violent psychic schism that would likely shatter every mind linked to his, obliterating us all into nothingness. Or I could join him, consciously merging my will with his to fight the encroaching chaos from within, becoming a warden in our collective hell. As the weight of his ultimatum settled upon me, the chapel held its breath, and I stood frozen, staring into the eyes of the man who held all of our fates in his hands. The choice was mine. In the dilapidated chapel, bathed in the sickly green glow of decaying stained glass, the two choices hung in the air like condemned souls. On his left, the shimmering portal promised an escape to a world he barely remembered, a world before the experiment. Ethan, his breath ragged and his body a canvas of scars from 1,000 imagined horrors, refused both. He squeezed his eyes shut, not steeling himself for an attack or a desperate flight, but focusing every ounce of his will, every fiber of his being, into a single silent demand that shook the very foundations of his nightmare. He didn't want escape and he didn't want power. He wanted the truth, the absolute, undeniable truth, no matter the cost. A sound like tearing fabric ripped through the chapel, but it wasn't the sound of monsters. It was the sound of reality reasserting itself. The grotesque altar crumbled into a pristine stainless steel counter. The weeping stone walls smoothed and brightened into sterile white tiles, their cracks vanishing as if they had never been. The oppressive, supernatural gloom was banished by the calm, steady hum of fluorescent lights overhead. The scent of damp earth and decay was replaced by the clean, antiseptic smell of a modern, functioning hospital. The nightmare was not breaking. It was dissolving, peeling back layer by layer like old, sun-faded wallpaper to reveal the solid structure beneath. Ethan stood, not in a cursed chapel, but in what appeared to be a hospital corridor, the illusion evaporating like morning mist. When Ethan dared to open his eyes, the corridor was gone. He was lying in a comfortable bed, tucked under a crisp, clean sheet in a private hospital room. The figure he had known as the monstrous Patient Zero stood beside him, no longer a patchwork of stitched flesh and raving madness, but a kind-eyed man in a white doctor's coat, a stethoscope draped around his neck. The doctor's voice was gentle, filled with a compassion Ethan hadn't heard in what felt like a lifetime. "There was no experiment, Ethan," he said softly. "There were no monsters, no twisted science. You've been in a catatonic state for 50 years. This world, the chapel, the horrors, you built it all yourself, a fortress to hide from a pain you couldn't face." The doctor's words hung in the air, a truth too heavy to comprehend. He gestured toward a large mirror hanging on the opposite wall. Hesitantly, Ethan pushed himself up, his limbs feeling strangely weak and uncooperative. He shuffled toward the glass, his heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against his ribs. The man who stared back was not him, not the young, determined survivor he saw in his mind's eye. The reflection was that of a frail, wrinkled old man, with thin white hair, liver spots dotting his fragile skin, and eyes that held the deep, weary sorrow of a century. The horror story wasn't an experiment gone wrong. It was a lifelong dream, a half-century nightmare spun from the mind of a boy trapped in a sleeping man's body. The final shot holds on this moment of devastating clarity. From the reflection's point of view, we see the old Ethan, the real Ethan, Raise a trembling, withered hand to touch the cold surface of the mirror. A single tear escapes his eye, tracing a path through the deep lines on his cheek. A silent testament to a life lived entirely in a dream. The subtle atmospheric soundtrack of his imagined world fades away, replaced by the stark rhythmic beep of a heart monitor, a lonely metronome counting the final beats of a life he never knew. After a long moment of black screen, a new scene emerges, soft and bright. The old Ethan, now dressed in simple, comfortable clothes and seated in a wheelchair, is in a sun-drenched hospital garden. The sterile beeps are gone, replaced by the gentle chirping of birds and the rustle of leaves in a warm breeze. He closes his ancient eyes, tilting his face up toward the sky. He extends a trembling hand not to a mirror, but into the open air, feeling the genuine warmth of the sun on his skin for what might be the very first time. A small peaceful smile, real and unburdened, forms on his lips.